This webinar explores sustainability within the VISTA context, member and supervisor roles in planning for sustainability, and strategies and practices that support sustainability efforts. I'm your host, Molly Pelzer from the VISTA Training Unit. Assisting me today off screen at our partner organization are Bethany Dusoblin and Andy Clark from Education Northwest. You'll see us in the chat and the Q&A to assist you during today's session and to help get your questions answered. We're delighted to have with us Sarah Gleason. Sarah serves as a consultant and facilitator and has worked with the Corporation for National and Community Service and Peace Corps, as well as with a variety of nonprofit, government, and community-based organizations. We are glad she is part of the VISTA Pre-Service Orientation Facilitation Team and has also trained VISTA supervisors. Additionally, she has a lot of knowledge and experience that she will share with us today. Next, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers, who you will hear from a little bit later in the presentation. First is Shamika Coleman. She's a NeighborWorks VISTA serving at DHIC, Inc. DHIC is a NeighborWorks charter member who has been developing affordable housing for 40 years across North Carolina. They develop and rehab housing for seniors, multifamily units, and supportive housing for individuals with special needs living independently. Courtney Selleck-Freeman is the Executive Coordinator with Community Frameworks in Bremerton and Spokane, Washington. Community Frameworks' mission is to support and develop affordable housing as a foundation upon which individuals, families, and neighborhoods can build vital communities. A little later on, we'll be hearing from them about their projects and their sustainability efforts. I also want to highlight and thank Debbie White with NeighborWorks and Tina Dunphy, State Program Director with the Ohio Corporation State Office, for their support in development of this webinar. The examples and guests we'll hear from today came to us via Tina, Debbie, and NeighborWorks. NeighborWorks America creates opportunities for people to live in affordable homes, improve their lives, and strengthen their communities. In partnership with CNCS, NeighborWorks sponsors one of the largest VISTA programs. Since the program's inception in 2009, NeighborWorks AmeriCorps VISTAs have served all over the nation, enhancing the capacity of NeighborWorks organizations to provide services to communities in poverty. We'll also provide a snapshot of what we'll cover today, and then I will pass it over to Sarah. By the end of this webinar, we hope you will be able to define sustainability within the VISTA context, define member and supervisor roles, and recognize how members and supervisors can support each other to achieve sustainability. Also identify specific practices that can lead to VISTA project sustainability, take steps to plan for program sustainability, and identify existing resources to support sustainability efforts. And here's our agenda for today. First, we'll take a look at the definition of sustainability and how it relates to capacity building. Then we'll talk about planning for sustainability. We'll also hear from Shamika, a current VISTA, and Courtney, a VISTA alum and current VISTA supervisor, about their experiences in the field. And we'll look at some activities that VISTAs might use. And then we will finally have time for your questions. Now I'm very happy to turn it over to Sarah.
Hey, everybody. This is Sarah, and it's great to be with you today. I'm guessing that I may have met some of you at your PSOs. And I'm glad to be here to talk with you about sustainability because I've seen the difference that VISTAs can make, and I'm passionate about making sure that that impact is long-lasting. So let's begin with the definition of what we mean about sustainability. If we think about it in the VISTA context, sustainability is the ability of a program or an organization to continue engaging community stakeholders to meet the needs of the community efficiently and effectively through potentially changing circumstances and sources of support after the departure of the last VISTA member. And while you as VISTA members, of course, have an important role to play in supporting and strengthening the sustainability of your program or your organization, just remember that the overall responsibility for program sustainability lies with the staff of the sponsoring organization, as they've got sort of the longer-term, bigger picture view of the program. Ideally, they will have designed your VISTA project and your assignment description with sustainability in mind from the start. But even so, I do want to spend a couple minutes painting a kind of a picture of what overall program sustainability looks like. So if we think in general about nonprofit and community-based programs, they need 4 kinds of capacity to support sustainability, which we're showing here as 4 legs of a stool. So these are, we'll start at the top with program capacity. That's about having effective programs that are making a demonstrable difference and are addressing real community needs. Secondly, we have communication capacity, which is basically the ability to tell your story effectively so that you can engage and maintain the support that you need. And we've got human capacity, which is pretty obvious. We're talking about effective and empowered staff and volunteers. And the 4th leg, which is often the one we go to first, which is sufficient financial resources from a diversity of sources. And we paint the picture as a stool because just like a real 4-legged stool, all 4 legs of this sustainability stool have to be strong enough to support the program's sustainability. If any one leg is too weak, the whole thing falls down. And lastly, I want to point out, as you see in this image, that connecting and strengthening these 4 legs of the sustainability stool are engaged and empowered community members and organizational stakeholders. As you know, their support is crucial to sustainability, and these are the ones that actually hold it all together. So as I said up front, VISTA projects are developed with a goal to phase out the need for VISTA members, which is why your assignments are focused on strengthening the capacity of your sponsoring sites while engaging community members and partners to ensure that the project can run by itself after you're gone. And every VISTA project plan, before you were even recruited, includes some thinking and planning around sustainability. When your sponsoring organization applied for VISTA support, one part of the VISTA application that they completed is called the Community Strengthening section, and that particularly is where program sustainability is described. So I hope it's clear to you already really how sustainability and capacity building are linked. VISTA projects are building the capacity that supports program sustainability. And as a VISTA member, you then are working to create, expand, or strengthen an organization's systems or processes, and to engage and empower community members and organizational partners to enable the organization and the community to sustain the program activities after the project's ended, which is what sustainability is all about. So the theory sounds good, but does it work in reality? Well, VISTA actually asked that question, and in 2010, there was a large-scale study of past VISTA projects that was published by WESTAT, looking at the projects after their VISTAs were gone. And it found that, in fact, yes, the vast majority of programs supported by VISTA continue to work to address the needs of their community after the last VISTA was gone. So there's a few highlights of this here on your screen. 84% of the projects that were looked at were still operating 3 years after the departure of that last VISTA, and more than 90% of those projects had either fully or partially achieved their 3 most important project goals. And you'll be pleased to know that project directors and staff from more than 90% of those projects reported that VISTA members were either critical or very helpful in achieving those project goals. So I'm going to stop for a moment and ask you to weigh in here. Some of you have already been using the chat function. You should see a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to ask you to click into it And be sure you're sharing your responses with all participants to answer this question. What kind of variables do you think make a difference in a project's ability to be sustainable after the VISTAs have left?
Great. So we have some comments coming in, and again, make sure you are using the chat box and not the Q&A function. So let me catch up on the scroll. It looks like one is making sure to have transitional documentation, as well as buy-in from all key stakeholders, support from superiors, host site participation, as well as a good volunteer base, clear procedures and practices, timelines, context, etc. Let's see. Wow, these are really great, you guys. Volunteer retention, also engaging community members and training a new leader to keep it going. Wonderful. Again, we have more cooperation and communication with host site, community. Let's see, binder of past activities, teaching the new procedures, etc., etc. Sounds like they really have a lot of great ideas, Sarah.
Wow. Nice work, everybody. These are flashing by faster than I can even read them, but even in just the ones I've been able to read, I've seen you hitting on all of the ideas that came out of this report. So we're going to, while you continue to roll things in there, look at what came out of the report as far as the variables for sustainable projects. So the study found that the most important variables, and these are in order of importance, were the capacities, training, and dedication of the VISTA members, the support of the project from the community at large, the age of the organization and the organization's experience with doing these kind of project activities, and the centrality of the project's goals to the mission of the organization. So nice work, everyone. I just want to point out as you look at these that all of these reasons listed on the slide for, excuse me, I'm going to wait till the next slide to say that. So this is looking from the flip side at the projects that weren't sustained. And the reasons that were most often given for why they were not sustained were that there was either poor organization or project management, that they lacked needed resources, either funds or volunteers, that there was a lack of community support or a lack of support from the organization itself. And then in some cases, the project had actually met all of its goals and objectives, and that was the reason why it had ended. So now I'm going to ask you to notice that these reasons really are about the kinds of capacity that VISTAs are often assigned to build: internal systems and processes, volunteer financial resources, and community and organizational support. So you can see here, we see confirmation of the fact that VISTA members can really have a profound effect on sustainability for programs. And now I'm going to ask you to think about your own assignments. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you should see a poll appearing. We want to get a sense from the folks who are on this webinar about what you're focused on. So we're going to ask you to choose the top 1 or 2 capacity building areas that are the focus of your VAD activities. And we've got program development and improvement, recruitment and management of volunteers, partnerships with community members and organizations, communication or marketing and promotion, and increase and diversification of resources. So we'll give you a few more moments to weigh in, and then we'll tally up the poll results and see what we've got as far as the focus of the assignments of the people who are on this webinar right now, which is a lot of you. About 5 more seconds. Hopefully you've all weighed in. We'll see in just a moment here what the poll came up with. technology. All right. So a lot of folks working on program development and improvement, like a third of the folks who weighed in, it looks like, and a good number on volunteer recruitment and management, a good number also on partnerships, and then we've got people really in every area here, communications and in resource development as well. So you're spread out really across those 4 legs of the sustainability stool. That's great. So we're going to focus in now on an aspect of sustainability that no matter which area of capacity building you're working in, you're going to be needing to pay attention to. And you may remember from PSO that we talked about capacity building as a transfer of knowledge and products and relationships. So, no matter how much information you're gaining during your VISTA year or how many deliverables you're creating or how many contacts you develop, of course, if you don't intentionally pass it on to others in your organization or in your community, your work as a VISTA is ultimately not going to be sustainable. And this is really the most important contribution you as a VISTA can make to project sustainability, ensuring that the capacity you're building is effectively transferred and will be carried forward by others. So I'm about to ask you about your plan for passing on the capacity you're building and ask you to do a little bit of self-assessment. So I'm going to ask you to ask yourself, do you know who's going to be using or working with or relying on the knowledge and systems and products or relationships that you're building? It might be a VISTA who's coming after you, a staff person in your organization, it might be volunteers, it might be other community stakeholders. And if you know who those folks are, how are you going to ensure that they understand and are able to use and work with the knowledge and systems and products and relationships that you're building? And finally, you're going to need to think about how you'll ensure that the leaders in your organization and in your community understand the value of what you're building and are committed to carrying it forward. So again, we've got a poll. Maybe some of you are answering it already. I'm going to ask you, if you haven't yet, to answer that second question. Do you know, or excuse me, that first question, do you know who will carry on your work after you've left your service site? You can choose yes if you know already who that will be, and pick no if you don't know yet. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to weigh in on that. All right. Okay, so it looks like we've got a good chunk of folks, at least, well, it's more than half of the people who answered yes or no, who do know already who that's going to be, and some of you who don't know yet the answer to that question. So I would just say that wherever you are in your year of service, I know some of you are not as far into it as others, it's never too early to start thinking about who that might be and how you're going to pass it on when you leave. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Actually, the majority of the webinar will be specifically about how you'll do that. But I want to take a moment again to step back a little bit to the big picture, because sometimes you may find that helpful as well. At most of your assignments, I saw some folks saying that they're looking at really all those areas of capacity building. But for most of you, you're focusing on building capacity in one or maybe a couple of focus areas. So it might be helpful to you to think about who else is working on the other legs of the sustainability stool. Do you know who that is? And also to think about who, and this should be someone in your organization, is responsible for the big picture of sustainability for your program, who's thinking about really the whole picture, all four legs of the stool. And finally, it would be interesting to know, if you don't already, whether there is already in place a plan for ensuring the sustainability of your program. And if you don't know the answers to these questions, particularly if it's helpful to you to know about the big picture, I suggest working with your supervisor to find the answers. And that project plan or application might be a good place to start. So if there's not already an overall plan for sustainability, it's possible that you and your supervisor might sit down and work together on developing an overall plan for sustainability. But certainly, whether there is or is not an overall plan in place, you and your supervisor are going to need to focus on planning for the transfer of the capacity that you are building during your year of service. And in either case, your supervisor can be a guide, a planning partner, or a resource to support you as you develop a plan for passing it on. So if we think about what a sustainability plan looks like, you'd want to work with your supervisor to identify some objectives, some milestones that would mark progress on the path to those objectives, of course, a timeline for reaching those objectives, knowing that you've got a limited time that you're working with, and identifying then the activities or practices that would help you get to those sustainability objectives. And once you've identified those activities, you'll want to think about who would be responsible for them. Some of those activities may be appropriate for you as a VISTA member to carry out, while others may be more appropriate for your supervisor or another staff person in the organization to implement. For example, it might be more appropriate for a staff person to take the lead on some kinds of activities like advocating for a program with organizational leadership or making board presentations or strategic planning, or working with, say, a human resources or IT department on making systems changes. But there are many things that are appropriate, of course, for you as a VISTA to do, and we'll be looking at a bunch of concrete examples about some of those activities that might make sense for you to take on in your sustainability plan. And the last thing I want to say here is that once you've got a plan, you want to make a plan for checking in on the plan with your supervisor so that you can assess your progress toward those objectives and check in on the activities and the milestones. And, of course, that gives you an opportunity to adjust your plan as you need to as the year goes by. So, of course, you won't be surprised to hear that there's a number of resources on the VISTA campus that can help you with this, help you plan and assess your progress towards sustainability. You'll see a number of them on the screen here. The first one on the top of the list was developed by a group of VISTA leaders, and it covers really a wide range of topics. And some of these others, Capacity Building in Action, is like an interactive module that's got some more or less successful real-life scenarios about VISTA's building and transferring capacity. Passing the Torch is actually a recorded webinar that has some good specific examples about documenting and transitioning your work. The Strengthening Your Organization, Community, and Projects is actually a whole collection of resources. And then Creating a Binder for the Next VISTA is also created by a VISTA leader. It's a PowerPoint with some great ideas for what to leave behind, whether you're doing that in a hard copy or kind of electronic binder. There's also plenty of external resources out there that you might find helpful in assessing and planning. These web-based resources are not endorsed by the Corporation for National and Community Service, but they are some good examples of other tools that are out there. The first one, the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool, is something that was originally developed for public health programs, but it can be used really by any community-based program. And the website has a lot of stuff. It's got a step-by-step overview, a scoring guide for the assessment tool, a sample report, some planning templates, and sample action steps for each domain of the tool, and lots more. And the last one on the screen is a resource for nonprofit organizations who are looking at sustainability at that organization level. It's got a learning guide and a set of tools from the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole, and it focuses on 5 kind of high-level elements of organizational sustainability, including organizational vision and governance. Okay, so now we're going to change things up a bit and give you a chance to hear from Shamika and Courtney about what sustainability looks like in their programs.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm happy to now introduce Shamika Coleman. Shamika is currently serving as an AmeriCorps VISTA in partnership with DHIC in Raleigh, North Carolina. She has committed her life to making a positive impact within her community dating back to volunteering while attending the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Shamika has over 15 years of experience in advocacy and the nonprofit social profit arena. She is a proud advocate for violence prevention and community engagement. She also holds a master's degree in counseling studies and a bachelor's degree in psychology. For the past 2 years, she and her 2 activist sons focused on developing sustainable food options and encouraging community engagement within a rural community while engaging in intentional living in a church. Shamika's dad focuses on resident services at the organization's multifamily sites, and she is committed to creating change in communities and organizations she is connected to. Shamika, thank you so much for joining us today. Please share your insights with us.
My pleasure, Molly. Thank you so much for an awesome introduction. It's certainly my pleasure to be here today, and I want to share first a little bit about DHIC. DHIC is a NeighborWorks charter member who has been developing affordable housing for 40 years across North Carolina. They develop and rehab housing for seniors, multifamilies, as well as supportive housing for individuals with special needs living independently. The cool thing about DHIC is that it has over 35 properties and serves over 2,000 families within their rental portfolio. DHIC has developed multiple single-family home communities as well. DHIC currently partners with external property management companies to manage their growing portfolio and partner with external human services organizations to provide additional supportive residential services to their communities. NeighborWorks VISTA's dad focuses on capacity building, sustainability assessments, and development of new community partners for their multifamily residential communities. My AmeriCorps VISTA assignment with DHIC was really a great fit for my commitment to my community engagement and activism. This is the exciting part right here to share. Take a moment to piggyback on some of the essential elements of sustainability that our great partner Sheriff mentioned earlier. This organization's essential elements of sustainability are found in that they have established support from the communities that their properties are located in, along with the city and county government support in each of those counties across the state of North Carolina. DHIC is also deemed a pretty established and experienced organization. After all, having 40 years of service will get you there. And the sustainability for this organization is really addressed in seeking and linking multiple community partners committing to be engaged in providing their specialty services at multifamily sites within the DHIC portfolio. So one of the first priorities for me in addressing the layers of sustainability was partnering with property managers and providing relationship-building activities and events for residents. In working with external property management companies, I did find that there may be differences of perspectives of residents and community that may need to be initially addressed. My next focus was connecting faith-based groups with multifamily property sites for partnerships. I really found it helpful to live within my community as I meet many of the community representatives that are seeking to provide services to residents. It's literally like they come knocking at my front door. That was a really easy part of my job. Another sustainability focus for me at DHIC is introducing best practices and deliverable outcomes for resident supportive services. DHIC seeks to expand financial capacity by offering measurable outcomes of success of resident-supported services to investors and the community at large. I want to take this time to really thank you all so much for the opportunity to talk about what I'm doing here at DHIC and my sustainability project. If you would like to contact me, here's my info. I'd love to help you along the way, and thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you, Shamika. It's always so inspiring for us to hear from the currently serving members. Now I am happy to introduce our second guest speaker. Courtney Stellick-Freeman is the Executive Coordinator with Community Frameworks in Bremerton and Spokane, Washington, where she is responsible for human resources, resource development, and board support. She began her work at Community Frameworks as an AmeriCorps VISTA in 2009 and was hired as a full-time staff member in 2010. Courtney was the first VISTA in a 3-year project to create a housing and neighborhood revitalization program and has supervised several VISTAs since then. She has a master's degree from California State University Fullerton in anthropology with a focus on economics, and Courtney is passionate about creating vibrant neighborhoods, financial education, and gardening. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you, Molly. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney. As Molly said, I started with Community Frameworks in 2009 as an AmeriCorps VISTA, and my project was to carry out research and development for a new program. That program was, it would revitalize neighborhoods through the acquisition and rehabilitation of foreclosed or otherwise dilapidated homes. As far as sustainability of the programs, I've seen it from both sides, from a VISTA member as well as a VISTA supervisor. So I've seen it from those different perspectives. I think from the get-go, it's really helpful if sustainability plans can be written into your VAD or a larger work plan for the program. My VAD, when I was a VISTA, as well as the larger work plan around that, included creating a sustainable way to fund the program, which ended up being a combination of program revenue and annual fundraising. But that was something that I was creating when I was a VISTA. The VAD also included the creation of a specific handoff plan in the last quarter of my VISTA year. So because this was in the plan, we were able to proactively know when it was time to start planning the handoff. The staff member who was going to be running the newly created program was assigned to work with me, and we spent a small portion of each week from that point forward on transition activities. But the organization was thinking about the sustainability of the program even before they applied to host a VISTA. The creation of this neighborhood and housing revitalization program was a strategic direction that the organization wanted to take at that time and to respond to the foreclosure crisis. So the creation of this program had actually been written into the organization's strategic plan, and so sufficient company resources were available to help me carry it out. And that included a supervisor who became my mentor, who was also very engaged in the project and gave it enough time and energy to help me when I needed it. As Shamika was saying, you know, the community at large being supportive is also very important, and that was the case in my project as well. This program filled a large need that the community was asking for, and so they were very supportive, both with financial support and volunteer time. It's never too early to start thinking about the sustainability of the program, whether you're in the beginning of your VISTA year or toward the end. As a VISTA, you have the best view of your project, and you may be the best person to know what knowledge, files, or other items will need to be transferred or what capacities need to be built. So you might be the person who needs to tell somebody that that needs to happen. In our case, we knew we would be applying for a Year 2 VISTA for this program. So since I knew the program and all of its needs, I was able to help write the VAD for the Year 2 VISTA and to interview candidates. And that was helpful in order to create continuity of the program. If you don't see a plan for financial sustainability in your VAD, you'll want to ask your supervisor whether there's a plan and whether there's something you can do to help with that. One of the most important pieces we do as VISTAs is building relationships in the community. And this can also be one of the hardest things to hand off. I found that keeping a good contacts spreadsheet starting at the beginning of the project was helpful. that includes not just names and contacts, but also a brief description of what the relationship is of that person to your organization or to your project. Then toward the end of the project, I included other staff members in community meetings in order to introduce those people around and in order to hand off those relationships, make the introductions before the end of the VISTA year. It is of utmost importance to be able to hand off your documents and notes. Community Frameworks has a share drive where I could keep my program files organized and the next person could pick them up. If your organization doesn't have a share drive, Sarah is going to be talking a little bit later about some applications that are online that you can use in order to do that function. Especially toward the end of the year when the program was ready to go, I left copious notes and written procedures that the staff member could follow at that point. Like I said, our handoff began 3 months in advance with staff being assigned to that area on a part-time basis until my VISTA year ended. And it is really important to have some time with staff to train them in your work. Again, as I said, as a VISTA, you're the best person to know what items you will need to be handed off or to transfer. Don't be afraid to let your supervisor know what you'll need in order to do this effectively. So now I'm going to hand this back over to Sarah.
Wow, thank you, Courtney and Shamika. This was really rich, and I'm sure everybody's really appreciating hearing some real live examples from the field. So now we're going to give everybody else a chance once again to share some thoughts about what you're doing. So I'm going to ask you to use that chat function to take a minute to share with each other some ideas that might be helpful to the group about what you're doing to transfer the knowledge, products, or relationships that you're building. Okay, giant manual, glossary, brain book. I like that idea. Google Sites, training staff, documents on a shared drive, spreadsheets, binders. Yes, yes, yes. SharePoint resource database. Excellent. Oh, now they're going so fast. Tracking those partnerships and school visits, making PowerPoints, memorandums of understanding, very important, and spreadsheets on all that community outreach. Salesforce, whatever kind of database you're using in your organization, keeping that all updated. Resource packets, and introducing new staff to the community leaders. That is great. Those relationships are, as Courtney mentioned, some among the toughest things to hand off. Pictures with each name, brilliant idea. All right. Okay. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, directions with visuals. I love these ideas to, not just use words, but really make it possible for people to connect. All right, procedure steps. Thank you. So now I almost feel silly moving actually to the next couple slides here because between Shamika and Courtney and you all, we've heard many of these ideas, at least briefly, but I am going to run through a few activities that, as I said, many of which at least have already been mentioned for ways to pass on your work so that it can be carried forward. And we're going to start with, the knowledge that you've gained throughout your year here. You might create exact asset maps or other kinds of ways of cataloging and representing the assets and the capacities that you've identified in your community so that those can be connected to one another and to the program and carried on and built upon by others. You mentioned some of this, but documenting and collecting stories of people in your community who are affected by the issues you're addressing or who've been positively impacted by your program, or the stories of volunteers and other kind of community champions who've invested in your program. You might write these down, might record them, video, audio, an image of the person. You also might think about if this is something that you can work on, some kind of impact or outcomes evaluation that can demonstrate the impact of your program, and of course then you want to be sharing those results with as many people as possible. You might be making presentations to organizational leaders and to staff with those results and in other ways connecting your program and your work to the organization's mission and vision so that it's clear how central it is to them moving forward. And, of course, identifying and creating, if need be, opportunities to share the story of your program with the community wherever you can. And if you're creating products as part of your assignment, you'll want to, of course, identify who's going to be using them, and then you have an opportunity to design and carry out training for those people and to work with them one-on-one to ensure that they understand and are comfortable using the products that you've created. You can also, and we heard this both from you all and also from our guest speakers, creating step-by-step guides to help others carry the work forward, event planning guides, user guides, process guides, templates that can make key tasks easier for others after you're gone. And, of course, this is pretty much everybody's thinking about this, finding a way to assemble your products and storing them in a way that they'll be accessible after you're gone. Courtney talked about a shared electronic drive at her organization. If you don't have something like that that's already in place, you might look out there and explore some of the free resources that I did note some people were using already, like Dropbox or Google Drive or SugarSync. And then if you do choose a resource that people perhaps are not yet familiar with, you want to make sure that you spend the time to help them get comfortable with using those sharing platforms before you leave. And of course, you want to make sure that those electronic resources aren't only linked to an account that will disappear after you leave, and you'll want to make sure that you leave behind any kind of usernames or passwords that other people will need to access things after you're gone. And then relationships, as Courtney said, this can be among the trickiest things to transfer. You might want to, while you're still there working with others, do a kind of stakeholder analysis and document that and pass on your results for others to build on as they move forward. Of course, we heard some great ideas about a contact database that has not just names and numbers, but who these folks are and how best to communicate with them. And you might want to take things a step further and create a plan to identify and intentionally develop community champions so that they're solidly connected to the program and to the staff and volunteers, whether you're there or not. And again, you might formalize that in another way, creating something like a community advisory board or committee. And if you did that, you want to make sure that you document their scope of responsibility, who the members are, any kind of working agreements or decision-making processes that they've agreed upon. And then, and I saw some folks are working on this already, if you are working with organizational partners, you want to work with them to create some written memoranda, memos of understanding or memos of agreement that articulate the partners' roles and responsibilities in as much detail as possible. So now we're going to look at one more example of the kind of capacity building that another VISTA project has successfully transferred.
Great. Thank you again, Sarah. Hello, everyone. This is Molly. I have one more example from the field to share with you. This example also comes to us from a NeighborWorks partner organization, Family Services, Inc., FSI, located in North Charleston, South Carolina. So FSI empowers individuals to achieve financial and housing stability through advocacy, counseling, and education. Listeners share examples of how their previous VISTAs touched all the legs of this sustainability stool by building program, community, financial, and human capacity, while also enhancing the support of the community and stakeholders to make sure everything is tied together. Having a VISTA successfully coordinate and enhance a client survey project grew both program and financial capacity. FSI used the survey results to show grantors and funders the impact of their services in the community and make the case for increased funding to support tried and true community projects that work for all of their clients. This survey is conducted every 6 months in conjunction with a follow-up report to clients and funders. Another VISTA also established a volunteer base for their annual event, Money Rocks. Money Rocks is a youth financial education summit. Before the capacity building efforts of this VISTA, only FSI staff and employees managed and worked at the event. This year's event, however, had the support of 97 volunteers, and while the work in this area is still being perfected, it was imperative to get these volunteers on board to assist with the event and make the event as successful as possible. Yet another VISTA developed a tremendous presence on social media. This VISTA was a real go-getter in growing social media efforts, and due to her hard work, Facebook followers increased to more than 1,600. That VISTA documented her process, which turned into best practices for all social media outlets used by FSI, and their social media followers are still growing. The increased social media presence built excitement within the community around FSI, which resulted in community support and increased volunteer engagement, building human capacity. FSI also had 2 VISTAs redesign outreach materials, which included a website and also info cards. Because of their efforts, massive amounts of information was condensed into sleek and informative wrap cards, and brand standards and templates developed by these VISTAs are now used across the organization. However, the largest project they worked on was the new website for the organization. So after releasing the new website, their workshop registrations increased significantly, and it increased the outreach of their program. Sarah, now I would like to turn it back to you.
Sarah, you
Great.
on mute.
Your phone may be on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. So what I said is I'm going to turn it back over to everybody else, actually, and I'm going to ask all the VISTA participants to do one last chat. Think about one action, whether you already were planning on it or something perhaps that's come to your mind as you've seen these other great ideas, and use the chat function to list one action that you'd need to take to ensure that your work will continue after the project ends. All right, we've got synopsis of the work, binders, documents, making a presentation to staff. Whoa, okay. Encouragement letter to the next VISTA, like it. A resource map, establishing clear goals, a team of volunteers who actually want to do the work, absolutely. Guidebook, an actual conversation with a new VISTA. If you can do that, that's great. Not everybody has that opportunity. An orientation packet, a Google Drive, yeah, contact information so the new VISTAs can leave. Find some ambassadors, great idea. Okay, wow. These are really great ideas, and I hope that as you're writing those into the chat, you're actually committing yourself to making those real. List of introductions, a contract tree. I'm not sure I know what that is. Maybe contact. Yeah, there we go, as I suspected. Yeah, make sure your supervisor understands how the folder works. Social media procedures manual. Okay, great. So we're going to throw up a slide with a few other next steps that we want to suggest that everyone think about. We've mentioned several times, all of us have, about working with your supervisor. So one next step, if you haven't talked about this connection between what you're doing and sustainability with your supervisor, is to have a little brainstorm with them about how your VAD objectives are leading to long-term sustainability for the program. And again, making a list of the capacities that need to be transferred, the knowledge, the products, the relationships, so that you don't miss something as you're making your plan for transferring it. As folks asked when this would be up, in about another week, this webinar will be up for you to find all the web links and so on. Check those resources out, and I'm convinced that you'll find some that will help you to either start or enhance your sustainability plan. And just yesterday, we actually did a webinar on sustainability for supervisors. And so if your supervisor missed that, you might encourage them to check out the recording that, like this one, will be up in about a week on the VISTA campus. All right, thanks everybody for hanging in there and for all the great ideas that are still coming in. And I'll leave you for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been a very lively group. I agree with you, and thank you to Shamika and also Courtney. While we get ready for the Q&A, you should now see another evaluation poll on the right side of your screen. Please take the time to answer the questions in the poll. We like to be able to improve these webinars, and your input really helps us with that process. So I know we've given you a lot to think about, and I know that you have some questions, and now it's time for those questions. You can ask questions using the Q&A panel located in the right side of your screen. Remember to click the Q&A button if you cannot see the Q&A panel, and also make sure that you're not putting your questions into the chat box. And now I will ask Troy, our operator, to let us know how we can ask questions via the phone.
Not a problem. And once again, if you'd like to ask a question via the phone, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Be sure to unmute your line and record your first and last name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. If you would like to withdraw your question, you may press *2. Once again, at this time, press *1 to ask a question. One moment to see if we have any come up in queue.
Thank you, Troy. And while we're waiting for our phone questions, we've actually had a couple questions come in electronically via our Q&A function. And one question that I saw come up, Sarah, was a question regarding the stakeholder analysis. Can you please talk a little bit more about what a stakeholder analysis entails, please?
I sure can, and I am also going to direct folks to one of my favorite resources for many things, including this. So a stakeholder analysis basically is looking around, and it's best to do this with others, and really making a list and an analysis of anybody who's affected by your issue or your program, depending on how you're looking at it, or have an effect on it. So this could be community members, it could be other organizations in the community, it could be decision makers in government, and understanding how they relate to the program or to the issue and what their interests are in that program or issue. And once you've sort of been able to map that out, then you can begin to think about who you're in relationship with, where they stand on things, and where you might want to build stronger relationships, how you might approach drawing folks in, or who you really need to deal with, even that's standing in the way. So the resource that I mentioned, and I know that I haven't put this in writing anywhere, but it's called the Community Toolbox from the University of Kansas. It's got a pretty easy web address, ctb.ku.edu, and there's just a wealth of resources for community-based work there, including a whole section on doing participatory stakeholder analysis.
Great. So I'm just going to repeat that website again, Sarah, to make sure we all got it. It's C as in cat, T as in Tom, B as in boy, .ku.edu. Is that right?
That's correct. Community Toolbox, KansasUniversity.edu.
Great. Thank you so much. We have one question coming in that is a pretty big question, and so I think I'm going to take just a second to respond and then ask our other presenters and guests to respond as well. And the question is from Kim, and what happens if I'm not getting the amount of support and direction that I need in order to develop project sustainability? And Kim, I first want to say that we understand that being a VISTA isn't always easygoing. It takes a lot of work. The work will be hard. The pay will be low, etc. If you remember back to what LBJ mentioned in our legacy video that we showed to all of you on your opening night of PSO. So keeping that in mind, I would encourage you to share this webinar with your supervisor and other individuals at your organization. And also remember that we offered a webinar yesterday specifically geared towards supervisors. So I hope that that will be an initial step to building project sustainability and starting down this road. If, however, you find that it's just unsurmountable and you're not getting that sort of support, I encourage you to reach out to your corporation state office and make sure that they're in the loop, because they will be able to give you support as well. So now I'd like to hear from Sarah, Shamika, or Courtney as to what are some ways to overcome that overwhelming feeling when you're working on project sustainability if you don't have a lot of support?
Well, this is Courtney. I think the ideas that Molly had are excellent, and I would definitely second all of those. One thing you could do to start is your supervisor, kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. They might not see what this whole sustainability picture is. And realistically, you have the closest view to your project, and so you know the kind of things that need to be handed off. So I agree with Molly, definitely getting together with your supervisor and showing them, either this webinar or the supervisor webinar from yesterday. But also, starting a list yourself from the things that you learned today, and make an appointment with your supervisor and say, hey, I learned these things. I know that you really want this program to last into the future, and here are some things that I think we need to work on. So can we come up with some objectives, and can we set some timelines and milestones and that kind of thing? And I bet your supervisor will be receptive to that if you bring that to them.
Thanks, Courtney. Would Sarah or Shamika like to give some words of advice or support as well?
Sure. This is Shamika. And I would say what I found to be helpful is maximizing what's in front of me. I initially did not have much support from my supervisor as well, because they were actually really tied up planning for the 30th anniversary. So I had to get really creative in utilizing the resources and the little information I had, but just stepping out with that one piece usually leads to another piece that comes into play to help you, or getting recommendations from that first step, or getting a referral, or start interviewing other staff that could be helpful as well, that could give you leads in creating the opportunities you're looking for to develop the sustainability, even when you don't necessarily have all the expected tools that you were looking for with your supervisor.
Great. Thank you so much, Shamika. Also, always great to hear from the current VISTA. Our next question comes from Katie. And Katie asks, my organization was able to recruit from within to find a VISTA to follow me. Our skills are different, but equally valuable to the organization. What tips do you have for transferring my work to someone who will end up having a slightly different VAD? Sarah, would you like to take the first crack at that one?
Sure. So I guess a couple of things I would say. One is thinking about what that you have been working on does need to be carried forward by that VISTA. And some of it may not go to them, it may go to someone else, but assuming that even though their VAD is slightly different, some of it is what they're going to be picking up on. It sounds like you know this person, and that gives you the opportunity to do some face-to-face. You know, think about what is it that's, you know, at the core, what's essential here that they need to be able to continue building on or working with. And knowing that person, think about what might be some of the best ways to make that happen. Is that just sitting together and walking through it? Are they a person who will work well from documents, and so the documentation is going to be the key? And then recognizing that since it will be slightly different, it may not be, not everything that you're doing will be probably transferred to that person. Again, it sounds like you know, you understand their skills, so that would help you to think about what might be the best methods for passing it on that match with the way they learn and what it is that they're going to be assigned to do.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Let's see. Do our other speakers have any tips for this, or should we move on to the next question? Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Joan would like to know, do you have any suggestions or best practices for improving communications within the organization? And let's see, Courtney, if you're willing, since you're currently serving in an organization, if you would be willing to take the first answer at this question about improving communication.
Hi, sure. Well, I think probably within most organizations, as a broad generalization, communications can always be improved. This is definitely something we're actually working on within community frameworks right now. We are working on setting up regular all-staff meetings. That's just, you know, a once-a-week check-in so that everybody knows kind of what everybody else is doing. That is something I think supervisors actually often appreciate it when VISTAs are willing to take the lead on setting some of these things up. As probably the newest person in your organization, you might not feel necessarily comfortable coming to your supervisor and saying, hey, I think we need to meet once a week. But in most cases, your supervisor will actually appreciate it when you come to them and say that. And maybe even on a larger basis, maybe there's a team that you need to meet with once a week. And when you come to your supervisor with this idea, you know, give them some sort of plan, like, I think we should meet once a week, and I think we need to touch base on X, Y, and Z once a week. So that would be my suggestion.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney. And let's see. Kristen would like us to explain one more time, or explain what a community champion is. And I don't remember who in the presentation talked about community champions, but could someone please explain that?
Mm-hmm. So this is Sarah, and I mentioned the idea of community champions. And these are, I mean, you can think of them kind of like brand champions. You know, they're people who've had a positive experience with your program, whether they were participants or clients or volunteers or partners or donors, other kinds of supporters, who you are sort of intentionally developing and empowering to tell the story of your program and to engage others. So that, you know, many people, there are people who just jump into this role and take it on, and wherever they go, they're talking about your program and they're inviting others to be part of it. But there are ways that you can think about this like leadership development, really, that you can intentionally support their development and empower them to do that, help them by creating opportunities, by recognizing what they're doing in a way that really builds their ability and opportunities to tell the story, spread the word, and engage others in your program.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's see. I'm going to check back in with Troy to see if we have any questions via the phone.
We did have a question, but it seems like that party may have disconnected.
Oh, no.
If you did dial back in, please press *1 if you did want to ask that question.
All right, and I'll do better about checking in with you. I got so excited about all the great questions coming in via our online tool. Rhea has a question related to overlapping VISTA. So is there a way for CNCS to overlap VISTA service so the outgoing VISTA can train the incoming VISTA? Rhea was able to connect with the previous VISTA and was able to learn of her challenges, which provided her a lot of support. So I'll take the first answer to this question, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of ability to overlap VISTA service. We definitely understand that it's always good to meet and speak with someone to transfer knowledge, but there are lots of tips and resources in this webinar so that if you're unable to have an overlap with the next VISTA or the next individual who will lead the project, hopefully you'll be able to implement some of what we discussed today. Do any of our speakers, would you like to add anything to that comment about overlapping VISTA and how it was good to connect with previous VISTAs?
Sarah, I did see a number of VISTAs in the chat naming that they were going to leave behind their contact information, even though they wouldn't physically be there, so that VISTA coming after them could call or email with them.
That is a great tip, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before I go to the next question on the WebEx console, Troy, do we have anyone on the phone with us?
Yes, that party did queue back up. It was for Whit. Your line is now open.
Hi. My question is basically, I'm in an organization that has seen within the last month a new CEO, a new CFO, a new resource director, and a new director of campaign fundraising. And so I'm in an organization that is seeing a lot of new direction. There are a lot of new ideas, and so I'm wondering what are some tips for developing the sustainability when you're in an organization that's in flux?
Sarah, would you like to take the first response to that question from Whit?
That is a good question. I think anything that you can do to ensure that your program stays kind of front and center for people as they're developing new direction, whether that means finding ways to sit down with each of the new people as they come in or do presentations to them. If there's a board of directors that's really providing strategic direction, finding ways to make sure that they don't lose track of the good work that you're doing. Of course, the reality in organizations is that if they do ultimately choose to shift direction, it is possible that the work may not be sustained at your organization, which is also why it's important for you to continue to be in relationship with other community partners who may have been part of the effort or understand how important the work is or how successful it's been, who may be able to be part of keeping the work going forward if the organization's commitment to it shifts with new leadership.
Great.
This is
Thank
Courtney.
you so much, Sarah. Would anyone else like to respond?
Yeah, this is Courtney. I would just add to that a lot of times, as I'm sure you're finding out, within those periods of huge shift, there's a lot of knowledge that's lost. So I would also encourage you to document everything, even more than you already would. All of the things that Sarah said, I would absolutely second. And assuming that your project is going to continue to go forward, document everything.
Great. Thank you so much. Troy, do we have any other questions via the phone?
I'm showing no additional questions at this time.
All right. Thank you. We'll go back to the WebEx questions, which are great, everyone. We've got a little more time for Q&A, so keep those questions coming in. Unfortunately, we might not be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. Joy says, in regards to promoting sustainability, what would you suggest for a VISTA should they, in their position, encounter drastically shifting views for their program from supervisors or members of the organization? So it sounds like there might be a little disconnect. How could that be addressed in terms of sustainability? And I'll let any of our speakers go ahead and answer that if they would like to.
Hey, this is Shamika. If I'm understanding correctly, I think one of the things that may need to happen is maybe some type of intro or a reintroduction of what the focus is in the VAD. I did find that when I first came to my organization, they really couldn't make the connection that I actually wasn't an intern and that I couldn't, you know, answer phones and make copies and do cool stuff like that. So when it comes to someone maybe challenging the structure of the program development that you may be encountering, it may be a good opportunity to maybe do an overview or review to introduce what your focus is and what your purpose is and what your programming is, and then be open to get recommendations and thoughts to not necessarily challenge the change, but empower them to still have input that would maybe influence their receiving what the program structure is.
Excellent response. Thank you so much, Shamika. Let's see. Amanda has a question also. A lot of my projects are being indirectly stalled by city bureaucracy. Do you have any suggestions to make sure these projects can be successful once implemented? And again, I'll open that question up to any of our speakers who might have experience working with city offices or other government agencies.
This is Sarah, and I guess I'm not entirely clear on whether the question is about moving things through the city bureaucracy or, you know, the fact that they're being delayed and making sure that they'll be successful later. I mean, I guess I'll just start from I do some work to figure out whether the indirect stalling is actually just the wheels grinding and it's just going to take time, or whether there is actually some persons or departments whose interests differ and that there is actually some relationship building or understanding of what's behind the indirect stalling that could help in either moving things forward or avoiding that particular issue going forward. I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering the right question, though, so I'll stop there.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. We actually also did a webinar, and the name of it is escaping me right now, but it was about building community buy-in, discussions with stakeholders, other agencies or partners that you might be working with. So I would encourage you, for anyone who is stumbling just a little bit working with other agencies or offices, to look at how you can negotiate those relationships and join or review that webinar that is saved on the campus. And if the name comes to me, which it probably will as soon as we all disconnect, I'll be sure to mention it. So let's see. Troy, do we have any questions on the phone?
I'm still showing no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more in the chat. Jill says, if you are a third-year final VISTA at an organization with no paid staff, what is the best way to recruit community members to take over ongoing projects and responsibilities so they can continue without you? And would any of our speakers like to answer that question? Shamika, you mentioned a few things about working with your community and how you developed that community buy-in. How did you manage to get some of your, more robust community support?
Yes, thank you. I think the primary thing that I looked to do was to really think outside of the box. There are a lot of organizations in communities that are doing similar projects and maybe can't get to their target population. So it was helpful for me to work backwards and look at what I was trying to implement and look at who else could be targeting that target population and make those connections. For me, my out-of-the-box thought was the faith-based community, who always enjoys engaging communities, whether their desires to build relationship. Well, that is really going to help sustainability to connect an organization that really wants to be there for the long haul with a target population. For me, my dad was focused on affordable housing development organization. So we have a very large target population for several community programs. But if that's not necessarily the focus, I would say look into your faith-based communities, look into any community leaders, some person's name that you may have heard a lot in the community that may be the voice of the community, and developing a team of allies that way, and maybe take them through a mini training and make them ambassadors of the program and partners with the organization that you're serving at, and make those connections with them so that that long-term relationship could also be sustainable long after you're gone.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shamika. Courtney or Sarah, anything else to add about recruiting those really great community volunteers?
This is Sarah. I think that you want to look around at who are the folks who already care about those projects and responsibilities, and think about how they might be divided up. Who's got the time, the talent, the interest. Perhaps it doesn't all go to one volunteer. Perhaps it's a set of volunteers. But, I would be first looking to people who have already got a connection and an interest, and develop that interest in continuing the work forward, because those are the folks who are going to have the real commitment to keep things going, the people who can see how much it matters in their communities, who've already invested in and have positive experiences with the program and want to see it carried forward.
And this is Courtney. I would also just add, if there's someone on your board who could be a champion for that, not pushing all of the work back onto, a small group of board members, but, as Shamika and Sarah both said, looking at, maybe different people can do different things, but maybe there's one board member who can take and champion it and orchestrate it so that all of those people who are doing all of those different things have one central person they can go to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Troy, I think we might have a caller on the phone. Is Coral with us?
Yes, she is. And let's see, Coral, your line is now open.
All right. Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
So I had mentioned the Brain Book, and I guess I'll take a step back. My name is Coral. I'm serving with the Montana Campus Compact in Gillette, Wyoming for the Girl Scouts of Montana and Wyoming. And I'm not sure who came up with the term Brain Book. It might have been one of our VISTAs. I tried to find it in my notes, and I don't know where it originated from, but I do remember talking about it a bit at PSO. And so day one, I pretty much opened up a Google document called Brain Book, and I just first welcomed the new VISTA to their new site. I, explained that there's a lot going on and there's a lot of new stuff, but that, we appreciate them being here. And I try to talk about a lot of different things. So first I just have an area for getting started in the office, and then things to take a look at as far as the history of Girl Scouts, different things like that, history of the organization, staff, all that important stuff. And then I go into getting involved in your community. So, for example, getting a library card, rec center membership, where to shop for groceries, where the secondhand stores are, and different places to check out, also potential partners that we may have in the community. I've seen a lot of great information on the VISTA campus and the VISTA forums, but my supervisor has only been here for 8 months. I've only been here for a couple months now, and so this is really a rebuilding year for us. So when the next VISTA or staff member comes in, I just want them to have a very fresh idea of where they are in the community, what we've done in the past, what hasn't worked, contact lists, maps, just kind of a brain book of everything personal and professional that they would need to know in their new position.
Thank you, Coral. So it sounds like this is really a living document that will grow throughout the year.
Yeah, I try to check in on it maybe once or twice a week because you get caught up in doing what you're doing. You forget all this stuff that you once didn't know about your organization, or maybe even going back to your PSO training guide. And are there still questions that you maybe haven't answered, or have questions changed, answers changed? So it's something that I try to add to continuously. Different ways to volunteer in the community, all sorts of different opportunities that are available specifically to your site. So I'm trying to make it very site specific, but in a transferable way to the new person.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, and I love that we're able to get you to call in, so thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for their participation today and for joining. Thank you so much for the great questions. I especially want to thank Sarah, Shamika, and Courtney, and of course NeighborWorks for sharing such great stories from the field. But don't leave just yet. We have another webinar that I would like to tell you about. So join us for an upcoming webinar dedicated to time management on May 14th. Also, please let your supervisors know that the companion webinar to the member sustainability piece will be available on the VISTA campus. And you all should feel free to check out that webinar as well. Check the webinar for VISTA page on the campus to register for this and other upcoming webinar opportunities. And we hope to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for serving with VISTA. Have a great day, everyone.